Welcome to our session on fundraising during COVID-19 times. We have four very eminent speakers from four different funds here to talk about their journey and also to help you prepare for your fundraising process. We have Arjun Rao from Speciale Invest. Arjun Rao is a graduate of ISB and also the co-founder of Traveliyari, from which he exited in 2015. We have Deepak Agarwal from Idea Spring Capital. He's a serial investment banker and serves on the board of multiple companies where Idea Spring has invested. Kailash Nath, again, graduate from IIM Bangalore, worked with Narayana Health, comes with a very strong healthcare management background, worked with Unitas, and then moved to Bharat Innovation Fund, one of India's largest homegrown funds. We have from IKP Knowledge Park, Ms. Dipanvita Chattopadhyay, our chairman and CEO. She also serves as the director of India Innovation Fund and the president of IKP Eden. I'm Vikraman. I am an engineer slash management person. I moved to Bangalore to set up IKP Eden. I've been with IKP for 9 years. And with that, I would do a small introduction on IKP, and then we will follow up with introductions from each of the speakers. Yeah, IKP is a 20-year-old organization set up by ICICI and the Telangana state government to nurture innovation across India. Over the 20-year journey, IKP has supported over 600 companies. We are now located in 7 cities. We have seed funded or grant funded over 320 companies. We have worked with USAID, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the UK government, Department of Science and Technology, the Indian government, Department of Biotechnology, BIRAC, all of whom have been funding partners in enabling multiple programs across Hyderabad, Bangalore, and more recently we have worked with the Karnataka government to set up centers in Mangalore, Mysore, Belgaum, and we will be launching the Shimoga Center sometime later this month. Yeah. So I currently manage IKP Eden, which is a advanced maker space where you can make pretty much anything. We have very high-end machines and tools, which you can use, including a biotech chemistry lab, which is called the BioNest. This allows you to build pretty much any device from idea to pre-manufacturing prototype. Yeah. We also manage several funding programs, like I said, in partnership with multiple other agencies. Overall, IKP has impacted more than 600 companies through infrastructure support, funding support. We are located in, we have also recently opened a Delhi office. We are a not-for-profit organization, but we help enable all kinds of other organizations for profit, but pretty much innovation-based, technology-based companies are what we support in their growth process. Yeah? So we have worked with large companies, mid-sized companies, and startups in different capacities, but the bulk of the 600 that you see, they are mostly startups. So 500 or more are startups that we have worked with. Yeah, we have a few funding programs that are open. We have both grant funding and investment programs that are open. Nidhi Prayas, the Biotechnology Ignition Grant. I will leave these slides open for you later, and I'll keep these open during the Q&A session so you can take notes on these, and I'll come back to that. We have 2 other programs which are investment programs called the LEAP Fund and the Seed Fund. Like I said, these slides will be open for you later. With that, I will transfer it to Madam Dipanvita Madam to talk about our IKP Innovation Fund, the India Innovation Fund, which is under IKP Ventures.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll just, I said, do you want to take this slide out? So that we could put it in gallery mode and see all our the people who have joined. the names. So it'll be interesting. So we would know a few of the people who joined and understand. But that's okay. If you want to keep it for a while and then take it out, and so that will be good. So now regarding the India Innovation Fund, Vikraman told you about IKP. Why we are a not-for-profit, and while we work with the ecosystem, we were finding it difficult. This was in 2009 that I'm talking about. We were finding it difficult to invest in early stage startups, and the startup ecosystem was not the same as it is now. Our focus was largely healthcare, but we were okay looking at IP-based IT product companies as well. And at that time, we felt that we need to put out a for-profit fund, very early stage fund. We didn't have early stage funds at that point, and we were looking at just like a seed stage fund, pre-Series A, of course, and what kind of investments do we want to make. So we set up a small fund, India Innovation Fund, a 50 crore fund, and we made 7 investments. This is from 2009. We made 7 investments in healthcare, and as I said, IT companies that were product IT companies, but had huge intellectual property as an entry barrier. We exited after 8 years. We made a 2.4x, and I'll tell you, out of the 7 in our portfolio, 2 did very well, 3 kind of returned, 2 tanked. And a lot of people said, yeah, that's great. In this, I must tell, and Kailash, you would know, but for Arjun and Deepak and everyone else here, out of the 50 crores, it was actually a little less than 50, 49.9, because there was a reason why government didn't want, because 24 crores actually came from the Department of Science and Technology. They were one of the first time DST decided to put in equity money in a fund. And when I told at the end of 8 years to Mr. Mittal, who was heading NSTDD, Mr. Mittal, I want to return you the money. He said, Deepanita, we only give money. I've never heard government, nobody returns money to the government. But I said, but yeah, we have made, and I have to give you back. So there's a story he's told so many times in so many forums. Deepanita said she wants to give money back to the government. But I think what VCs do is, if we invest responsibly, we can make money. But when we make money, our responsibility is to return our money to the contributors, to the people who have given us the fund, who has trusted us. So, so we cannot make arbitrary investments. A lot of due diligence is required when we make investments. You will see that there are less investments that happen, and VCs take a longer time to invest. It's not like a grant program. So you have to understand the nuances. And before I end, I just wanted to tell you a little story. Renuka Ramnath, most of you have heard of Renuka. After she left ICICI Ventures, she started Multiples. And once I had asked Renuka, she was on our board, IKP board, and when Renuka, how do you decide which companies to fund, and why don't you invest in more companies? She said, Deepanita, we are into venture capital, not adventure capital. So we have to remember, this is not adventure capital, this is venture capital. So there's a lot of prudence that goes in. And since we are doing very early stage, a lot of due diligence is required. We take a lot of risk when we do funding. So with that, I must say that our first fund, as I said, we are putting together another 100 crore fund that will be only healthcare focused, and hope to come back with it soon. Vikraman?
Thank you, ma'am. Arjun, do you want to talk about Speciale Invest? How did you go about setting it up? What's the investment hypotheses?
Sure. Thank you so much, Vikraman, and thank you for those lovely anecdotes, Ipanita ma'am. Right, I learned something, and it's indeed good to see what you've done over more than a decade now. And right, we are only trying to learn a little bit from that and follow suit. I'm the founding partner of Speciale Invest. We're two partners, and we started this fund about 3.5 years ago. It's an early stage pre-seed fund focused on early stage deep technology ideas. We invest typically $500,000 and go up to $1 million sometimes in pretty much the inception stage of a company. Most of our investments are pre-revenue. In a lot of cases, they're also pre-product launch, right? Which means a team, a concept, and an MVP is the stage at which we are comfortable investing in. Two primary themes, of course, deep tech is the overarching theme of the fund. Within that, we do enterprise software startups using AI, machine learning, NLP, AR, VR, cloud, whatever is emerging and whatever is not relatively simple to build. It's just not tech enabled, but it has to have deep core IP at the center of the product. And then we do a bunch of industrial enterprise hardware as well. Sectors such as space technology, robotics, urban mobility, both land and air, electric vehicles, right? A wide gamut, again, with a strong focus of technology and innovation at the core. That's a little bit about the fund. The genesis of the fund is interesting. I think my co-founder partner of the fund is somebody that I've known for over a decade, about 13 years. We went to business school together, right? Vishesh, he comes from the venture investing world. Since business school, he went and joined, post-business school, he went and joined a venture capital fund called Venture East and spent 10 years there, learned the ropes of venture capital, doing early stage investments, working with startups, sitting on multiple boards, exiting companies, having write-offs, so on and so forth, right? So he has experience of that. He comes from a finance background, which is complementary to me in some sense. I'm an engineer by training, right? Worked in the software domain since 2001 in this ecosystem. Did product management post ISB, my business school days, and then did 2 startups myself, one in the online education space and one in the online travel space, and learned a lot through those 8 years of building something from scratch, having a lot of failures, some small successes, and a lot of learnings, right? And after I exited my last startup in 2015, right, I started thinking about what I wanted to do next, and so was Vishesh, right? Both of us started doing a few angel investments together, right? Because we had strong deal flow in terms of access to the ecosystem. Both of us had been around close to 15 years. We had networks, so entrepreneurs would ping us and ask us for advice and for guidance, and in some cases also fundraise, right? So we did that together a little bit, started with just advice, and then we said that has to be skin in the game, right? We just don't want to give gyan over a weekend to an entrepreneur, right? And then we started doing that. Between me and him, we had ended up with a portfolio of about, an angel portfolio of about 10 companies plus. And we got lucky, made some exits somewhere along the way, made some money for ourselves. Some people had trusted us to also invest along with us in that journey, right? And so they also saw some returns. That kind of gave us the confidence that maybe we can do this formally, right? And obviously the timing was amazing in terms of how the ecosystem was, really emerging. So many ideas, so many entrepreneurs getting better as opposed to even 10 years ago, right? And we thought that we had the right mix and background, both operationally as well as investing. And we saw a strong theme of the next 10 years and beyond being strong for deep technology from India going forward. While early last 10 years and 15 years has largely been about technology, digitization and technology enablement, I think as a country, we are well poised to do really deep tech stuff and emerging technology innovation stuff, and which we were passionate about. Between partners, we also had access and networks in global tech hubs and innovation hubs such as the Silicon Valley and Israel, where we learned a lot from. And we thought we can bring some of those learnings and those networks to see how can we find local entrepreneurs here solving similarly hard problems but also having the India advantage, right? And that's kind of broadly the genesis with what we started the fund in 2016. We today have 12 active portfolio companies and intend to do another 6 to 8 companies over this first fund life cycle, which is by next year. And we are raising a follow-on fund as we speak to invest in some of the best companies from the first fund as a second fund thesis, right? So that's a little bit about us and the background of why we have started. Super excited to be on this panel. Thank you so much for having me.
Deepak, do you want to go next?
No, Vikraman, thanks for us being here, and thanks to the other panelists, specifically from the Pranata ma'am, giving us some insights around the venture investing and specifically taking money from the government, which we have also taken some from SIDBI and other institutions. So super excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation and with the other co-panelists. Just a very quick run around us. We started our fund about 4 years ago, kind of little more than 4 years ago. The genesis of the fund started a little earlier than that, and then the I can say that in April of 2016, sometime we started going out into the market, and then started pitching our fund, and then also at the same time started looking at investing in the startups as well. In terms of the broad thesis of the fund and the people who started there is a partnership between a couple of people well known from the industry, right from Mohandas Pai to sorry, there's somebody saying that the sound is not clear. So Mohandas Pai plus the Patni family office and a couple of people from the industry who got together and formed this particular fund. The fund manager is Nagaran Dorasamy, who has done his own startup in the past, exited, and then had been the Thai president for a couple of years in Bangalore. And before that had done a couple of angel investments to learn the tricks of the trade. Joined hand with a couple of folks in the industry, and then we started this particular fund. When we started this at that time, there weren't that many venture funds which were specifically focused on the enterprise tech space, and that's where the thesis of this particular fund has been as well. So we invest in very early stage, similar to what Arjun and Kailash does. Invest in the very early stage enterprise product startups, fairly in the same space as what Arjun said in the deep tech. People who have been kind of building startups on the applications of AI, ML, computer vision, and robotics, and many of those, but fairly in the very early stages. I think out of our total 13 investments that we have done so far, there is only one startup which was the post-revenue, but most of the others were pre-revenue. And in 2 of the cases wherein we have invested has been the pre-product as well. And in one particular case, they were even actually just the Excel sheets. So that's where our thesis is. We do anything from a 500K to about $1 million checks. And so far, as I said, invested in 13 startups, looking at investing in another 3 or 4 by the year end, and then probably look at raising another fund by the end of the year. That's about us. I'm being involved with the fund since the day one. I have years of experience in the investing. Firstly, initially from the consumer internet, and then in the enterprise tech with again Patni family office from Hive. And before that had been into the investment banking and transaction advisory side for a couple of years before jumping into investing. Happy to be here and happy to take more questions.
Hi Kailash, can you talk about Bharat Fund?
Yeah, definitely. So thanks, Vikram, and thanks, Deepamita. Thank you for having me, and wonderful to be a part of this REPAM. And thanks for all attendees for taking time on a Friday afternoon to be a part of the discussion. I hope most of you remain with us for the rest of the conversation as well. But just to take you through what we do at Bharat Innovation Fund, we primarily invest out of two vehicles at this point in time. One is Bharat Innovation Fund, which is an early stage venture investor in deep tech focused companies. So globally competitive technology IP focused product companies is what our focus is. The second vehicle is called the Bharat Inclusive Seed Technology Fund or Technology Seed, Bharat Inclusive Technology Seed Fund, BITSEF, which is focused on companies developing tech-led impact solutions and services for the tier 2, tier 3 markets of the country, the real Bharat as we speak of it. So I mean, most of my time goes into helping the partners with the first vehicle. So I'll talk more about the first vehicle, but happy to answer any questions if there is something on the impact side as well. But from the first vehicle, we are typically looking at pre-Series A, Series A, and selectively Series B sort of investments. And we invest across sectors. We're sector agnostic. Our typical first check ranges anywhere between $1 million to $2.5 million, depending on the stage, depending on sector, depending on our thesis on that space, depending on the comfort, because some of the calls we take are subjective in nature. So we typically that's the range that we invest in. We have about 7 companies in our portfolio from the first one, and we look to probably double this portfolio in the next 2 or 3 years. We're about 2 years old in our investment period. We have about 3 more years for our deployment. And let's see, I mean, depending on how the economic shapes up, because it's certainly entering a new normal. So I don't want to put a number on how the portfolio would become, but really looking at that number, hopefully. And we have about, we are still in our fundraising process. We have about 6 or 7 more months before we do a final close of the fund. We are targeting about $100 million in size, but let's see how far we could go with our fundraise really. Our grassroots actually go back to the CII, the Center for Innovation, Incubation, Entrepreneurship, based out of IIM Ahmedabad, one of the oldest incubators in the country. But this is really the second fund which is coming out of CII. The first one was called Infuse Ventures, which was focused on clean tech. And that was seed and pre-Series A sort of investment into companies focused on the clean tech sector really. So think of us as Infuse too, but we are, I mean, because clean tech has a lot of IP and innovation in the space itself, we decided to continue with the same philosophy of backing IP focused companies. But from Bharat Innovation Fund, we are sector agnostic, and we are slightly later stage, as in we have done investments up to Series B so far. But that's really about us. Happy to answer any questions, but really picked about being a part of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Kailash. I'm going to ask questions as if I'm a startup and I'm trying to do fundraising for the first time. So I'm going to be like but I'm going to try and empathize with you as though I'm trying to, feel your pain. So how many startups do you screen, per quarter, and how many do you pick typically? Arjun?
Yeah, I think given that we're a first-time fund and a new fund, the numbers have also evolved for us. We started with less 20, 30 startups a month, and now we've gone to about 150 startups a month is what we see. So that's about, let's say, 400 to 500 startups a quarter, right? So annually, we could end up seeing close to 2,000 companies, right? 1,500 to 2,000 companies, depending on this thing. There have been some changes thanks to COVID, right, in terms of deal flow and how that has changed. But I would say that's been the generic pace over the last 1 year for us, right? And given that we are quite a concentrated, focused portfolio investor, just like some others here, right? We'll end up doing over a 4-year life cycle anywhere between 16 to 20 companies, which means 4 to 5 a year, which is one a quarter on an average, right? And therefore, that is the ratio. I would say 1 in every 400 to 500, right, ends up kind of becoming the ratio, right? Not that that's how we look at it, but that's the, there's a certain volume that comes in, and what we are comfortable doing is 4 to 5 a year.
Deepak, how is it at Idea Spring?
I think it's exactly the same numbers, I would say. So anything from 300 to 500 startups in a quarter. I say 500 at the outer limit because a lot of these may not even be relevant to our fund. But I would say that the relevant startups may be in the range of about 300 to 350 per quarter, and as exactly the same way what Arjun described. So we have invested in 13 startups so far over the 3.5 or 4 year journey of the fund. So it's going to be less than a quarter, one in a quarter. So we have done in some years we have done 5 startups, some years we have done even 2. So that way the total is 13 in the last 3.5 years. So yes, less than a quarter in sense. Some 3 in a year is what we have done.
So Kailash, what is the ideal way to reach out to you? Should I cold call you? Should I email you?
Interesting question, and this is something that I get asked in multiple conversations, right? So I think one way, a couple of suggestions that I would have for entrepreneurs trying to reach out to venture capital investors or investors they are trying to target for the next upcoming fundraise. I think it's always good to understand what is the investor's background. By background, I mean 2 things. One is what's the fund's philosophy? What do they back typically? For example, I see all the 3 investors on the panel are deep tech focused. So if say consumer internet companies come to us, probably it's not a great fit. So it's sometimes good to understand what is the firm you're looking at, what's the philosophy, and what's the partner's background. If you're reaching out to a partner and associate, what is the person's background? Sometimes it's good to sort of talk about things which the other person can relate to. And that's also a sort of a takeaway from the first point, right? When there's a commonality of the philosophy, it's always easier to relate to the other person you're talking to, right? And it's, to a question on how do we reach out to you, it's to increase your success or probability of success of a reply. It's best to find a mutual connect, and it's not very difficult to find a mutual connect. We live in a connected world where you open up LinkedIn, you will definitely find a mutual connect. And even if you have 10 connections, at least 2 or 3 will be someone who will know the other person very well. So best to get a warm introduction. Usually the other person will be obliged to reply when there is a common connection. It's also the fact that the common connection would have filtered the other person's request before coming on the targeted person. So generally the success probability is generally higher. So I'd always suggest everyone whom I meet, the entrepreneurs I meet, to generally find a common connection. It's not very difficult in this world before you reach out to the person. Otherwise, sometimes the emails get lost or the other person might not relate to the request that you're asking. So, you're just wasting your efforts. So it's best to find a mutual connect. Yeah.
Ma'am, your comments?
If you're looking at equity, like what Kailash says, the number of proposals to the number of proposals that will receive funding, the startups that will receive funding is so skewed. It is best to go through a referral. Somebody who knows me, if that person says, Deepanita, can you look at this proposal? It will definitely get much more attention. So to find out through your mentor network, through your LinkedIn network, because nowadays, all incubators, all grant funds, all offer various kinds of mentor network. So if you're a startup and if you have been in this field for the last 3 years or 4 years, or even 2 years, you would have developed a network. Please do your homework. If you don't do a bad impression, a patchy job, don't underestimate your investors that let me now write this, I will present a better case next time. There's nothing like that. First impression is so important. Make a good pitch, prepare yourself, go through a referral. That's what I would say.
Yeah, all right. So mutual connect, referrals, and first impressions matter. So should I send a slide deck to you with 50 slides, Deepak? Or what is the best way?
Yes, maybe not to me. No, I think, I think I cannot emphasize on this more than this one, but definitely you should. I mean, at least for me personally, I think I can kind of talk for the others as well here, is that, anything which is more than probably 15 slider is a very, very big off for me. I would actually prefer, there are, people who kind of do a very great, fantastic job within 8 slides. Even I have attended a particular conference sometime back wherein Rishad Premji was on a panel. He said that if you cannot summarize your story in less than 4 slides, can't more than 4 slides, then you can't do the job well. So, but obviously, I won't say that, but at least if you can do within this 8 to 15 slides, I think is something that works best. It kind of takes that much of a time for an investor to go through all those slides. And obviously, if you can do a very precise, good job of presenting your story within those slides, makes a lot of difference to people who have been, so kind of, do their justice to their time as well. But yeah, and all the, just, the last question that you had asked, I can't emphasize more on the job of, doing the research before you reach out to a particular investor, because, in my own LinkedIn, I kind of receive more than maybe 30 to 40 messages in a week. Out of that, I can say that more than 25 of those messages are being off, completely off, which is not even a, space that we invest in. So, all of them definitely expect a revert, but at the same time, for a person to kind of reverting to 40 of those messages all the time, it's kind of tough. So, you have to do a little bit of your own research before you reach out to an investor, is always preferable.
So Arjun, what would be a red flag when such a email with a pitch deck attachment comes to you? What would be red flags according to you? What would wow you?
Right. I think just to add on to, obviously bang on in terms of the 10 to 15 slider, the content of the email itself, right, is equally important, because that's a precursor to the opening the deck, right? And again, given the deluge of information or the pitches that come to us, right, that is, either it'll attract me to open the deck or it'll not give me as much incentive. We still try, of course, to try and open as every single deck that we get, even from, the generic email that is available on the website. So we try and do that, but it's just, you need to catch the attention, which is very important, right? I think I'm also noticing more and more that a one-page teaser is becoming quite the norm these days, right? Which is a great way of actually communicating your core differentiation, what you're trying to solve, what you're doing to solve it, who you are, right? Just a one-pager is becoming more and more important. Before anybody wants to see a 10-pager, maybe there's a one-pager, right? So I think these are things. Obviously, within the information itself, looking first about what sector and what problem you're trying to solve and what market it is in, right? And that is one aspect which is very important. How crisply, probably 1 slide, 2 slides, can you articulate that, right? Second thing, background of the team, right? And how they've come together. Team is super, super important. So emphasize why you as an entrepreneur are the best entrepreneur to solve this particular problem is a very important thing. I think a lot of jargon, a lot of macro numbers, or just generic report, driven numbers, market numbers, is not very, very relevant. I think, especially at the earliest stage that we're talking about, the bottom-up approach of saying this is the problem, this is the solution is more important than saying, 1.4 billion people, these many, use cases, this big the market, 10 billion market, 20 billion market, right? Those are tough to make sense out of at day zero, right? So I would not really worry about those, and those would send me the wrong signals, to be honest, right? I think the bottom-up approach to talking about the problem and the solution, and then the team, right? Enough emphasis on the team is what I'm always looking for.
So what would be your selection criteria? What would be the main metrics? Do you follow a template? Do you have, or what would be the criteria that you follow?
Difficult to put a template, right? Again, super early stage, team is amazingly important, which means we try to, once we have early interest in what the pitch is about and what the is about. We try to spend as much time as possible with the founding team, right? Obviously getting to know them, their background, their DNA, their motivation to do it, right? And how much work in background, like Deepanita ma'am said, right? Prepare, right? Have they come with preparation, right? Have they thought about this problem, not just for the last 2 weeks, but hopefully the last, 1 year, 6 months, 1 year, and done enough on ground research, come back with customer understanding, come back with competitive understanding, telling us why they are building the product the way they are building. So a lot of time gets spent in understanding this about the founders and whether they're in it for the long haul, right? Or are they doing the startup because it's cool to do a startup in today's environment, right? How has the team come together? Complementary skill sets is one aspect, but also their DNA has to match, because it's, we all understand, and it's very clear that building a startup is a long journey. It's a hard journey, right? So people need to be aware of that, and founding teams need to stick together through thick and thin. So we are engaging that quite a bit. And then, of course, because we are deep tech investors, we're evaluating the product and the technology quite deeply. The differentiation aspect, how hard is it to build, right? It should not be something that can be easily replicable in the market. Nothing is non-replicable, but it should be something that has fit for that the founder is able to solve it in a unique fashion. Therefore, no other team should easily just have a little more money and solve it overnight, right? That's kind of moat and differentiation, which is what we are looking for. Obviously, there is the basic of saying the market should be large enough and all of that. I would say look at the quality of the team, background, and why come together, and then look closely at core moat and differentiation on what product and technology they're building. And can they sustain that advantage over a period of time is what we are evaluating in our process.
Kailash, do you want to add to that?
No, I agree. Agree to what Arjun said. I think our philosophy is also very similar to this. First and foremost, the team has to be solid. And at our firm, we, like I said, we are looking at globally competitive technology IP, right? I mean, we're talking about companies which can get into the top 5 or at least top 10 of the world. So here we can't compromise on the quality of the team. When I say quality of the team should have, I'm not talking about really pedigree team. I mean, pedigree team is great. I've been fortunate enough to be in pedigree institutions also. So I know the value it brings to table. But what I'm saying is that is not the only thing that we look for. We look for entrepreneurs who have solid understanding of the problem they're solving. Not just understanding, but also the clarity and the focus. Because in, like Arjun said, it's a long haul, right? Journey. You're setting yourself up for a decade or 2 decades of building something that can really change people's lives. So during this journey, it's easy to get distracted, easy to get swayed by different trends or micro trends that are happening in your space. But if you're rock solid in your focus, I think that's very, very important to set yourself for success in such a long haul. So the mentality of the founding team is very, very important. How complementary are the skills and the backgrounds of the founding team members who are coming together, right? I mean, how well do they get together? Can they live with each other as a family? That's a question that we always looking out for. I'm looking out for signs to say if is there a unhealthy conflict or unhealthy dynamic between them. If we can spot it at early stage, then becomes a red flag to us, right? Or if people can work together and support each other when someone isn't able to face a particular situation, that shows real solidarity in the founding team. So that's sort of the first criteria for us. Second, have you done enough to since we are deep tech investors, is sort of focused on deep tech companies, have you done enough to for us to get a comfort that the tech that you're developing is really solid enough? Can this go and compete with the best in the world, not just the country, but the best in the world, right? I mean, we have invested in companies which are probably the only ones in their respective niches. So we are really talking about top 5, top 7 in the world. Are you there? So that's sort of the question that we ask ourselves before we get in, right? So other things, of course, we're talking about how big the problem is, how is the unit economics going to be? Can this sustain a larger, competition from a well-funded player somewhere else in the world? Are you strong enough, or are you in terms of product quality strong enough to take up on the best in the world? So those are the things that we look for when evaluating first, and before we engage deeply with the founders, before we build our thesis, before we go ahead and even sign a term sheet if we are convinced ourselves. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Kailash. Since there is a lot of emphasis on the team, Deepak, I have a question. So Oyo is a single founder company, Paytm is a single founder company, Amazon is a single founder company, Tesla is a single founder company. So how would you, and Y Combinator asks you, is there more than one founder? And do they own more than 15%? That's part of the application form. So how would you, look at Oyo or Paytm if they came to you way back in the day?
So, as the thesis of the fund, we many a times, look for more than one founder in the team. Not from the only perspective that, obviously 2 is better than 1 or even 3 is better than 2, but also at times, this is something that I say to people most of the times that, startup journey is a lonely journey. At many points in time, if your startup journey, there comes a point wherein, you need to think through many of those areas that you're working on, personal problems, a lot of the other things going on, and a lot of these issues you cannot probably talk to your investor. If your investors are your best friends, then obviously definitely, but at many times it doesn't happen like that. So that's where the places wherein having a co-founder or someone who's with the complementary skills definitely help. You can see the case with Cafe Coffee Day, wherein people are saying, I don't really know the more details, but he didn't have anybody to talk to at the time when the time were really, really difficult. So those are the places wherein it helps. Obviously, Oyo, Paytm, Elon Musk, Bezos, all other exceptions. People have built with the single, focus mind, great, valuable companies. Definitely, those are there. To be, honest with you, even Oyo, from a personal capacity, I had invested a check of Amit Patni and Arihan Patni at that time in Ritesh's company. But those are exceptions, definitely exceptions to it. But that can't be a norm for me specifically. I look for, or IdeaSpring as a fund, look for teams wherein we have at least more than one founder who have complementary skills, at least have worked some time in the past, so that they gel well, they look after each other whenever there is a need. And in many of those cases, when the tough time comes, people can help each other. That's the the crux that we look at.
Ma'am, do you want to qualify or quantify leadership qualities that you would look for in founders?
Interesting question. I would think we're talking of a founder. They've not become a leader. So the first thing, does that whoever he or she has clarity of thoughts. So what we are trying to solve, why we are trying to solve, and I think the clarity itself when you speak, whether it's a 4-slide presentation, whether it's a 10-slide presentation, whether it's a 15-slide, you should be able to explain with the same clarity what you want to do. There are only 4 or 5 things that people want to see. So I would think as a founder, you need clarity. First, you have to be, so you need to simplify in order to talk. If you use too much jargon, if you think that your investors have to understand your technology and you're a technology person, so all your slides will be about the technology, probably that wouldn't work. If you are just harping on the market, so don't be so theoretical that you're talking. I've also heard, there was at one point of time, people said that you have to be really say why it's so compelling and you have to see whether you have really faced that problem. I have seen people going a little theoretical in terms of saying, yes, when I saw this thing, I did this. I think it's about storytelling, but don't get into too much of a storytelling. Also be practical, be crisp. And yes, so to me, clarity is everything. It's good to have a team. How you build the team is definitely at times, startups don't have a team. If there is, fantastic. If not, at least let's see whether there is clarity. One thing which is needed is you have to understand whether your startup, whether your idea needs debt funding, equity, or grant. I think understanding what kind of funding you need is very, very important for a startup. If you can't say why I'm not going for debt and why I'm asking for equity, and whether they understand that equity means exit, being able to provide exit, and what it entails, because everything is not venture fundable. I think VC fundable, and that, whether they understand that or not, I think would be very important, because I've seen a lot of startups think business as usual, that will grow at its own pace, that's not non-linear, that will give an exit, can also be VC funded. So I think that understanding and that clarity about your ability to make it a David versus Goliath kind of a fight, are you willing to do that? Do you have that instinct, fighter instinct to do it? I think these are some of the things that will be important.
So,
I'd like to pick up on what Deepanvita madam said, particularly about nature of funding, nature of sources of capital. Right, it's very, very relevant. I think a lot of the media and all of us are equally culpable that we it looked like VC is the only way to raise money. It is not, right? Far from it, right? It is actually the fewest ways, smallest sources of capital in the ecosystem, right? Most of the businesses in our country particularly have not been built on venture funding, right? And massive businesses have been built, right? So it's very, very important to take a step back and understand whether your business falls into this, into whether it's venture fundable or not. Very relevant point. Just wanted to reiterate that. And we do that on a regular basis and remind entrepreneurs and say, just because a VC says no to you does not mean your business is bad.
Absolutely.
Your business is amazing, right? It's just not, there's not a fit for this source of capital and this nature of growing and this nature of exit, right? So it's very important to reiterate that, for all of us. Yeah.
Thank you, Arjun. So we used to have Dr. Bala Manian on the board, and he used to say that VCs don't mind giving me money because they know I will treat it like their own money. I will treat their money like my own money. So, and he also said that they trust me because I will tell them what went wrong without fudging data or all of that. So I think that maturity comes with being a serial entrepreneur. Have you seen that difference between a first-time founder versus second-time founder? Do you see that more often? The responsibility in cash management, the willingness to keep an investor's interests in mind.
No, definitely. I think, a second-time founder definitely comes with those learnings, right? And that maturity comes inherent because you've spent time, you have gone through the drill, you've gone through the tough times, you've understood the value of being open, of being, of asking for feedback and not feeling like, you know it all, right? I myself have been in that shoe, in that situation where I thought I knew it all, right? We're young, we're cocky, we're first-time entrepreneurs. You don't ask for advice enough. Right. And it comes from experience, unfortunately, that you realize that second time around a bit. Having said that, I think the ecosystem in general has gotten much more mature, has gotten much more collaborative and about helping each other. Right. And it's also a role that we as early investors probably have to play, of being that friend, of being that confidant for the first time entrepreneur and kind of allow them to feel comfortable that they can let their guard down. Right. Like Deepak mentioned in the past, there will be certain things they will never share with us. Right. And that's why you need a co-founder or somebody else. But largely, if we are really collaborative, if we can really, help them with a lot of things and be supportive and impress upon founders that we are a partner once we've invested, as opposed to being on the other side of the table. Right. I think you will see that founders will open up and they will reciprocate. It's not easy, definitely for the first time entrepreneur, but it's also, I think, the investor's job to try and build that rapport in that environment, right? Easy.
Vikram, can I add something here?
Please,
Being able to accept advice is very important, because at times when he said, I was the first time, okay, it happens all the time. Oh yeah, I know, they don't understand. You have to understand that your investor has empathy. If he or she is telling you something on your face, it's for your good. And having trust in your investor is very important, because I think able to understand advice, able to understand that if people are talking, are straightforward, life is so much more simple. Being able to tell you, this is not going to work, please change it, or maybe you should do something else. Do not think that it is possible that the investor is wrong. But I think go over it, mull it, talk to 10 more people, understand it. Don't insist, don't be a captive to your own idea.
No, perfect. I think you've put it beautifully.
Don't believe in your own
points I would like to make, right? And one is an anecdote, personal anecdote, right? In my last startup, we had, two offers to buy the company, right? To sell the company, right? From really large players, very good offers in hindsight, and we refused those offers, right? So of course, in hindsight, we should have sold, right? But the crux of the matter is not that we decided not to sell, but the crux of the matter is that we did not take advice and opinion from somebody who had been in that situation before we made that decision. We probably could have come to the same decision even post that advice. That is all right, right? But not having taken advice will stay with me for my entire life as a learning, and that I always share with other entrepreneurs, right? So that's a personal anecdote, right? And the second thing, which ma'am mentioned, amongst all of this of technology, market, and funding in this VC and startup world and this relationship, it's a people business right at the core. And that's why what madam said is very important. Trust is absolutely at the center of everything, right? And one cannot emphasize that enough.
So Deepak, so suppose we had suppose the team coming to you, we have a great idea, you like the team, typically how many meetings before you would even think about giving them a term sheet?
Kind of depends upon the company to company, sector, what place they've been coming from. Are they coming with a reference, or they are, came through somebody, or is it just a cold email that they wrote and then we have been doing the meeting? But I think in our, total of 13 investment plus the 2 term sheets, I don't think that we have given a term sheet to anybody with less than 5 to 6 meetings. So each meeting is a progressive meeting wherein, you kind of try to understand from a concept, what they're doing, to the market, to the, how kind of complementary skills they have, the team, and, beyond that in the market and other places. And plus one of the biggest factor is that how can we help as a VC? So if, even if you do all that and then at the end, we look at the overall market, we say that, oh yeah, this is a great team, this is the one that you should be investing in, but then can we as a fund invest in that? If the answer is no, most probably in that kind of scenario, we might say no as well. So, we have to go through that grill, and for that grill, I think we do anything from 4 to 5 to 6 kind of meetings. At the outside fence, I think in one particular case wherein we have done, I think more than 8 to 9 meetings before issuing a term sheet, because I think it's not just about we getting comfortable with the founders, but even founders were getting comfortable with us. And I think till that time we were getting that particular feeling that yes, the founders are actually okay to work with us as a team. I think, and then in those period of time, over the period, different meetings, we and the founder both understood that, okay, there is definitely a marriage here. So we should be binding. So it kind of helps both ways. So that's the outer fence, but otherwise yeah, as I said, 4 to 5, 6 meetings, particularly before we got on in issue.
Kailash, how long typically would you take for issuing the term sheet and the entire due diligence process?
So, okay, let me answer both. I mean, both in terms of number of meetings as well as the duration. So number of we generally follow very tight process in terms of our deal evaluation or due diligence as we speak. I don't, like Deepak said, I don't think we have done investments with less than 6-7 meetings because there are certain series of meetings that the team which is leading the investment diligence has to do to collect information, to collect, to dig deeper into understand technology better, to understand the pipeline of customers better, etc., etc. And then there is a set of meetings that we have to, or at least one meeting that we have to have the founding team meet the entire investment team, not just the team is leading the diligence, but also the entire team, with the entire investment team plus all the partners put together. And then if things go well, we also invite our investment committee members to come and meet the founders. I mean, not as a part of presentation, but just for them to know whom we are backing, who are these guys, what are they doing, etc. Right? I mean, ultimately they have to up to the investment. Sometimes they get non-verbal cues, as they put it, when you meet a person beyond the due diligence that the team puts together. So we also arrange a meeting for the investment committee members to come and meet them, whoever is available in the city to come and meet them. Sometimes, I mean, these days it's Zoom, right? I mean, you can't meet in person, so at least an interaction. Post that, we go ahead and, I mean, if everything else checks off, we provide a term sheet. But in terms of duration, it's anywhere, I mean, we try to shrink it as much as possible. We have made investments in less than 3 weeks of due diligence to anywhere up to 8 to 9 weeks of due diligence. It all depends on which sector that we're looking at, what's the complexity in the technology, how niche is it, how many experts are we able to tap into our network to really get our heads around it. Sometimes it just takes us a time in terms of reaching in our expert network, their availability, to get a sense of how differentiated this technology is, how deep is this tech, can this be replicated, etc. Right? I mean, before we get into the entire business planning conversation. So it really depends on the sector we're looking at. But yeah, we have definitely made one investment which has taken us less than 2.5-3 weeks of diligence to the term sheet. And thanks to the founding team, they were very upfront in sharing information. They found comfort with us in the first couple of meetings itself. There was a investment banker also in the scene who was mediating the conversations, who had made a lot of documentation easier for the founders. But having said that, the founders found a lot of comfort with us. They knew that we are the kind of investors they want to work with pretty early in our life stage of conversation, which made it very easy for us to shrink the entire due diligence time. But typically, that's the range that we talk about. Yeah.
Has there been a case where Arjun, when someone came to you for an investment, let's say they were asking for $500,000, but you wanted to double up while you were doing the due diligence process? Or was there some case where the story was too good to be true and then you backed out?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I would say increasing the size, obviously we have a typical range of what we are comfortable investing, right? And rarely do entrepreneurs come and ask for less money, right? So kind of by default, we are rarely pushing for something more that you need more, right? What we're trying to see is, is the capital enough to hit certain key milestones, right? That's what we're trying to emphasize upon founders when, let's say, the number is not ideal, or, founders are still trying to figure out how much they need, right? What we're trying to say is it should give you enough time, and it should enable you, whatever the capital is, should enable you to hit certain key milestones to get to the next level, either raise funding or whatever that next level is. That's the first emphasis. In terms of anything being, red flags or finding stuff during due diligence, happens not very often, honestly, right? Because we do spend enough time before, providing a term sheet that there is enough comfort and most of the things are disclosed, right? But you never know. There are certain things. There was, the odd situation when, while it was understood or there was some understanding earlier, but the founder was also operating another business, right? Which came out clearly, and his nature and depth of involvement in that other business came out with full clarity and transparency only during the fundraise process. or during the due diligence process. And that kind of became some sort of a roadblock for us, because our expectation is when we are investing into a founding team and a company, then we expect that team to 100% put their energies into this particular organization and this particular entity, as opposed to running multiple entities. That is a rarity that happens. So I think that's an example of something that comes up during due diligence, which then will make us to change our mind. But largely, small things can be taken care of. As long as problems are there that can be solved for, right, we are fine.
Ma'am, any examples from India Innovation Fund?
Okay, I can give you one example, I was directly not involved. It was Rajesh Rai, who is the CEO of the fund, and Ashwin. And Ashwin, now Kailash would know Ashwin Raghuraman. So I think InMobi, we had looked at InMobi, but somehow it didn't happen. And when we really wanted to go back, it was too late. So that was an example. So we didn't get, we looked at IdeaForge. Now because the fund is closed, we had looked at IdeaForge. We took a lot of decisions and we decided not to fund, because they were largely, and all of you would know IdeaForge, they were largely defense and government oriented. And we felt that government as a buyer, we were not completely convinced that would be. But InMobi was a huge miss, that I would say. But at the same time, many things, when you realize that, yes, you decide not to. I could give you another example, about exits. If you remember Mitra Vikraman, we had invested in Mitra Life Sciences. Mitra did so well. It raised 43 million in the US. It moved to the US. And we got an exit before Mitra actually bought back the shares. But we got a very decent exit from Mitra. And recently, when I was following up on what is happening, what happened is the founders, they raised more money, and the VC came and asked the founders to leave. So both, if you remember, Pradeep and, how can I forget him? Malik. Oh God, how did I forget Malik? So they actually, and the new person that came in, you'd know him too. But they're now closing. They are closed. Mitra is closed. And it's such a disaster that I couldn't believe that when we exited, no one thought Mitra would. So you don't know at what scale would a business become non-investable. So they could not raise further money. So to us, 43 million was great when they raised so quickly, but then at some point, both Malik and Pradeep, they couldn't, and so there will be all these cases. So we are happy that we got the exit, but I feel very bad for the company because I know Malik so well and I know his capability. But it's very tough to build a business beyond a point. So when do you exit? When do you sell? So it's a tough business. Startup business is not so easy. So, yeah.
I guess the investor also has to exit at the right moment. The founder needs to know when to pass it on to a professional CEO. Or in the interest of time, I'll start roping in the questions from the audience.
Sure.
So how has your investment strategy changed because of COVID-19? Do you look at different sectors? Given that you're not able to have as many meetings physically, has there been a change in how you evaluate founders nowadays?
For me?
Anyone? Deepak, you can take that, yeah?
I won't say that there is much change has happened. Obviously, in terms of the process, definitely, but in terms of the theses that we look at, in terms of the segments that we look at, there is not that much of change. Obviously, In terms of the people who have been approaching us, there is a lot more healthcare and health tech investments. The startups are reaching out. A lot of them are actually building the solutions for the COVID as well. So that has been happening. But in terms of our thesis, or even in terms of whether we are kind of slowing down or something, that hasn't happened. We are as early looking for those investments as now as well. In terms of the process, definitely it has gone through a lot of change, because obviously we are not even our own portfolio startups, we are not been meeting as we were meeting earlier frequently. We've been the new investments as well, we've been hardly meeting them. We need definitely one meeting before we kind of try to close a term sheet with the founders. That we do, but other than that, we're trying to make it as much virtual as possible, even in terms of the other processes as well, talking to a lot of people, because obviously before we make an investment or even give out a term sheet to the founders, we try to know them not only from themselves, but try to do a lot of ref check on them, as well as the process, the investment, the segments. So we try to speak with a lot of the expert in the workspace. So that has also gone most of it virtual. So we do that. But in terms of the process, there is obviously a lot of changes have happened, but that hasn't slowed us down at even a minute. So that hasn't happened. At the same time, in terms of the solutions and other things, there have been, as I said, there are a lot of robotics companies, there are a lot of health tech, healthcare segment startups that are reaching out, but our thesis and the core that we follow, that has remained the same. There is no change at all there.
Arjun, you want to take that?
Not very different. Obviously, I think what doesn't change is how we look at technology innovation as a curve, because we're looking at 5 to 10 years ahead anyway, right? As long as that continues, and COVID has not really changed anything particularly about that, it shouldn't change. We of course probably going back and doing a little more research at our end in terms of and kind of evaluating how the world is changing, and therefore will there be new theses and new technology platforms that will become more and more important in the coming years, right? And that you have to build a hypothesis, you have to build a thesis of sorts, and hopefully find some companies of that nature, right? Pace-wise, I think we were cautious for probably a quarter when lockdown and the COVID hit, right? Because there was just too much chaos and too much unknown, right? It still is there, it's not gone away, but I think the first quarter also meant that we had to focus a lot on the existing portfolio. They needed attention, right, because of the situation. But after that, we've also kind of been back on reasonable cadence. We've only given out one term sheet since lockdown. And even there, that has been the founders for a couple of years, right? So that kind of matters. When we have reduced face-to-face meetings, it matters whether there's a relationship, whether there's a rapport already with the founder, right? It does impact, right? There's no question it impacts not able to meet people face-to-face before you take the full decision. How much of that is a long-term effect, and over the next 6 months, 12 months, as the world becomes a little more normal, we will find out. I'm also hearing in general from the ecosystem that a lot of new deals that are happening in the last, let's say, 1 quarter have been where founders and investors have known each other over a period of time, right? That seems to be a overarching theme over the last, from general, what we know from our peers and networks in the ecosystem. That has been the change. Core thesis, invest in 5 to 10 year horizons for, really innovative stuff. So
Kailash, has there been a change in your approach? Do you see entrepreneurs becoming more opportunistic, shifting from their earlier plans, trying to be a bit more desperate?
Yeah, I don't know about desperate, but I'm sure they're finding adjacent opportunities, and especially from, since most of my work, and probably to speak about Ashwin as well, most of our work focus right now is on healthcare. So we see a lot of adjacent opportunities for companies looking at multiple sectors in healthcare, trying to find COVID-related opportunities. But I mean, unpopular opinion maybe, but COVID, I think, is going to be a short-term sort of phase. I still think focus is what I would value much more than the opportunity tendencies among entrepreneurs. I would still, urge entrepreneurs to. I mean, sure, there are sectors within healthcare which would be facing some tailwind because of tailwind or headwind, depending on where you are or which side of the table you are. But there will be opportunities for technologically superior offerings very shortly in the medium term also. So if you're an entrepreneur developing something breakthrough, even if it's taking time, I would urge you to focus on what you're developing if you're convinced, and if it's something that can be a killer product globally in the next few years to come. I think that's what you should focus on and pursue your passion. Yeah.
So conserving cash is quite critical in these times. So do you have any recommendations? Do you think ESOPs is a good option to retain your talent, your team? Any examples or comments from your teams that had planned for it before?
Probably I'll take that because I'm just coming out of a conversation of a portfolio company is looking at an ESOP plan. So probably I can share my sort of discussion without naming the company, probably share some learnings there. So yeah, sure. This is a time where you're trying to conserve as much cash as possible. Your further funding rounds are taking time. Getting closing the even ongoing conversation is going to take time because of multiple reasons, right? So I think ESOP is a great way, but ESOP, just for the sake of ESOP, shouldn't be given out. I mean, you should be valuing the talent that you have in your team. And in my opinion, I think great talent not just looks at opportunity as a job, but also looks at it as a long-term career. If there's a great fit between your employees and what you're trying to do, they'll definitely want to be a part of a growth story. So in that way, ESOPs are a great way to reward the talent in your team. But sometimes it's gets a little tricky because how do you really structure an ESOP, right? I mean, you have had certain funding rounds and you have valued your company, but then you would want to ensure that the ESOP that you structured for your team is friendly enough, right? For example, have a sufficient exercise period for them. I mean, you will have a certain vesting period for the ESOP, but also ensure that they have a sufficiently long exercise period so that they are flexible enough to exercise their options once they are vested. I think that's something that people really miss out on. People focus a lot on vesting period, but they don't really give a thought on how easily can your employees exercise them. So I think having a very employee-friendly ESOP structure is very, very important. Not just having an ESOP pool for the sake of it. I think it's something that requires thought, requires talking to your investors, talking to your advisors, how you want to structure it. But I think this makes a lot of sense, and I mean, goes a long way in valuing your employees, especially the great talent that you have in your team. Yeah.
Ma'am, any examples? So we have one company, Mflux Motors. They were making this electric racing bike, but temporarily, Varun Mittal, the founder, he calls it a detour. So they're working on simpler products, and they've actually started commercializing face shields, etc. They're working on simpler electronics. And they've actually built a sustainable cash flow, month-on-month cash flow during these times, completely disconnected products, but their prototype racing bike was almost ready. So to not give up on that idea, they just worked on a few other ideas, built parallel cash flows. Do you have any examples that you want to add on how startups are surviving during these times?
So the question is for me?
Yes.
Okay. So, I would think, so if you can't manage, everyone is dead in the long term, but in the short term, you have to survive. And the only way to survive is to have cash and to keep your employees, because a company without employees is a very tough job for the founders to manage. So how do you motivate your employees? You have to either, see, ESOP, you don't give to everyone, right? ESOP is a very planned way of managing talent. But I would think learn to manage cash flow, conserve cash, reduce your burn rate. If you think that your burn rates can be managed by doing other tweaks, and I see, for example, Biosense, Abhishek Sen. He's also, he was chatting with me about 2 months back. He said, yes, I am actually trying to do COVID-related products because, yes, I understand healthcare. I am in the medical devices space, but that's what I can do now. And he's getting some amazing orders from the government. He's saying, I've never seen India government gives orders so quickly and releases money. So he has found the sweet spot, but not everyone can do that. So you should not be doing something completely out of your way just because you cannot manage it. There are various ways of managing cash flow, including actually borrowing from at a low rate. Find out ways to borrow a little bit of money. I think it should not be just doing COVID products is the only opportunity. You have to survive for, suppose, to kind of balance out, also to ensure that you have your vendors in place, you have your material management, supply chain management. So all that got disrupted. And things are getting better. So you have to know how to manage that. I would think that you have to be not inventive, you have to be flexible enough to know how to manage cash. Cash management is key to survival, and that has to be done. ESOP is not the only way. So, and all of us know that you can give ESOPs to only a few people to retain talent. It's not for everyone. But it's very important to be able to talk to your vendors. Vendors would understand, because the supply chain, that's why have very good relationships. So there are multiple ways, and I would think that mFlux should not deviate too much, and because the EV market is not gone. The EV market is there. There is a challenge in terms of all transport markets, all that, but I don't think the EV market is gone. So one needs to, and if he's good at batteries, I would think storage batteries and storage would be a very important area that he should look at. If he can increase that and get good technology there, I would love to see that.
Yeah. So
a quick comment on this, Vikraman. So as what ma'am said, just about the relationship. So I just want to give a very quick comment. I don't want to name the company, but this particular entrepreneur, wherein he actually has a very, kind of enough cash in his kitty, but then he can't, obviously not innovative, but then he has a personal relationship. And obviously you can do that when you are a small team, but 20 people team, he actually knows all of them and their families very well. Not only, in terms of what this kind of a building up the relationship with your employees also helps a lot, and specifically in such cases wherein many of your employees are actually looking up to you. So even in one particular case wherein one of the employees' mom had been on bed for some time and they were suspecting it to be of COVID positive, this guy had been calling him almost 3 or 4 times a day to just kind of checking on her. So you have to kind of be innovative at every level. Something like this, doing maybe a kind of a stand-up meeting with your employees every day, night. A lot of these things can go a long way when you are in tough situations like this.
So yeah, clarification on mFlux. He calls it a detour. It's not a pivot. So
yeah, thank God.
They're sticking to the product. It's a detour. He calls it a detour, not a pivot. Ma'am, you are on several committees, government committees at the highest levels. Can you talk about some of the new initiatives, government initiatives? There's one question from the audience. Does the government review these fund allocations, etc.? To clarify, these are all private entities here on the screen. Of course, there is some kind of assistance from the government, but decision making is made locally. That is to answer that question. But can you talk about these new initiatives that the government has brought about during these times? Also, Atmanirbhar, will there be?
Atmanirbhar Bharat. So one is the collateral-free debt that government is talking about, and making startup funding a priority sector lending. The guidelines have not come as yet, and I'm just waiting for the guidelines to come. We have to see how banks react, because all of us know how important priority sector lending is to the banks. And if that becomes a reality, and if that can be made a collateral free, so whether that would increase the NPA burden of the banks, how the banks would handle. So these are discussions, I'm sure. And I would like to see the guidelines on the banking sector regarding startup as a priority sector lending. The other, there are lots of these, whether it's BIRAC, whether it is DST's Kavach fund, whether BETI has a fund. There's a lot of small funds. IKP put up the ICO fund, there have been the ACT, there have been small COVID-related funds. But yes, I also understand that many of the government disbursals, the fund disbursals, are a little slow. I am expecting those to happen, but I'm seeing that there's a slight kind of, the pace is slow. Could be because of the full attention that has gone into COVID. Could be at the government level, there's a cash management issue. There's a GST collection issue problem. So the states have not got enough money back from the government. So there are multiple issues, and the incentives you are looking at is largely in terms of loans and that kind of impacts. So about Atmanirbhar Bharat, there are certain things, like even for your pharmaceutical sector, there are certain APIs that can be made in India. So I think the startups need to look at what are the things that the government is looking for within, quote unquote, making the country self-reliant. And there will be focus. If you look at what IAN is doing, India Network, they are actually looking at a little bit of funding towards these areas. So I think there are opportunities, and but a lot is linked to either infrastructure lending. If you look at the agriculture sector incentives, it's largely infrastructure setup and FPOs and that kind of money. Whether agriculture, the startups that should focus, that are focusing on agri-tech, should link up in terms of infrastructure, which can help. Because if you see now, one price, one mandi, one country, that itself is a huge opportunity for ag-tech companies to align their business to that. I think one needs to look at, understand policies, what can be done, and we can have separate meetings, because one mandi, one country has a huge implication on the ag-tech companies. And I would love to hear from others what they are thinking. I interpret the policies because we need to look at what is supposed to happen.
Kailash, any boost to the manufacturing, electronics, hardware sector? Are you focusing more on that, assuming that more manufacturing might move to India?
No, I think we are open to, for example, in healthcare itself, right? We see boost to medical device manufacturing itself. There's one thing that I've discussing internally also. We see a lot of screening devices in India, but they're not really medical grade diagnostic equipment that's made in India, right? For example, you take MRI, CT equipment within healthcare, or you could take not just healthcare, but take multiple industrial grade equipment which are not made in India really. I think we have enough talent to build these industrial grade equipment within the country, and I see I definitely see policies which are going to boost that, which are coming, and I think this space really will explode. There will be a great demand. I mean, one, we are becoming Atmanirbhar as a country, but I'm sure that, there's a realization that there's demand for equipment like this in the country. Let's take healthcare itself, right? There is the reach to quality diagnostic services in the country is really poor, right? If you take if you go beyond the cities, the tier 2, tier 3 parts of the country really lack the service required for diagnostic facilities. So think about entrepreneur who wants to set up a radiology clinic. He doesn't have access to really clinically graded tier 1 MRI or CT equipment, for example, right? All that he has access to is refurbished equipment, which really doesn't cut it beyond a point. Sure, you can manage it for a couple of years, but then you don't really, it's not something that you want to sustain the business for at least a decade to come by. So I see a great demand here. So it was a great need, but that need is getting translated to demand. And I would love to see how the government responds and boosts this also. And I'm confident, given the existing party at the center, they definitely are looking at this space, and there's something that really is going to come in this space shortly. Yeah.
Good. So we are at 5:30. So I will take closing remarks from the speakers. Arjun, can you maybe talk about 3 sectors that are crowded already, but you still see a lot of applications coming in? And what do you think startups should be doing?
I think what we've noticed, of course, is, there's a deluge of edutech as a sector, deals in that sector, and there's lots happening. I think there's still early days that, people have realized that this is such a big opportunity, and there are very similar themes that have been focused on. I'm curious to see how, genuinely disruptive ideas will come through in edtech, hopefully in the next months and couple of years, right? Now that you know that the demand has suddenly been introduced to digital means of teaching as well as learning, right? I think we need a lot of pieces of the puzzle to be solved, right? I think there's a lot of emphasis and there's a need for things to be solved on the teacher side, for example, right? Everybody's focusing on content and delivery and student, right? Then, of course, I think there's so many players, that are a few large players that have emerged recently. But I think teacher side is very, very important, particularly for our country, right? Only if we solve that and their enablement can we solve the other side also in the long run, right? I think that's an interesting sector, right? May not necessarily fit our deep tech thesis, but I'm curious to see what emerges from there. Healthcare, obviously, right? And a little down the line in terms of biotech, right? For drug discovery, for drug development itself, I think, again, talent is there. I think various ways of using AI, machine learning, data from various sources, and using all of that to really impact drug development and drug discovery. And part of it, if that can happen in India, that inherently is a very long gestation, or historically has been a very long gestation industry, right? And you guys know this better than we do, right? But we're paying a lot of attention to that segment, honestly, right? And we're seeing a lot of interesting stuff happening globally, and we think, why not some of that can happen in India? And we've also come across a few entrepreneurs talk about those ideas here locally, right? So that's a sector that we like. Deepak and I actually, both of us have seen some deals in the semiconductor space, right? We're talking about electronics and certain manufacturing moving here. Right? I think it's, again, a tough sector, right? Can India manufacture stuff on the semiconductor side of things? Unique capabilities are required, right? Both on the talent side as well as on the software and the hardware side, right? But again, given the China ecosystem and what is happening there, even if we can take a sliver of that, the market haul in terms of the 5 to 10 year roadmap, right? There's an opportunity, right? And talent again is available, right? So I would say semiconductor is a very interesting space for the entire ecosystem to look at. Yeah, I think these 3 come to mind. There are many others. Climate change is interesting, actually, right? Climate change in different forms and shape, right? What innovation leads to carbon capture? What innovation leads to, better manufacturing processes and materials, right? I think on the deep tech side, we are trying to learn a lot, right? I think what it has given us is time. When we're not doing too many deals, we try to read as much as possible and talk to as many people so that we're prepared. Hopefully, good entrepreneurs come forward with such ideas. Super excited. Many, many things. I could just top 2 or 3 I hopefully mentioned.
Deepak, you want to add to that?
Sure. So, just kind of taking on from where Arjun has left. So, just maybe adding another one particular space that we are very excited about and even have one investment in the space. And then I'm still kind of looking at more and more, which is in the electric vehicle side. So not per se specifically on the vehicle, but even the plumbing and the infrastructure that has been built around that. We've been looking at that. So that is one space we are very excited about. Obviously, it's the demand of the time that the old generation move from a lot of this fossil fuel towards the more greener solutions. And there has been a lot of, I can say tremendous innovation that has been happening, not from the some of the academia, but the corporate side, and obviously the startups which are front leading this. So as one space that we've been watching very, very carefully, we have already made one investment that is in Numosity. Which is kind of building exactly what I said, is more on the middleware or the plumbing for this space on the software side, but still kind of looking at more and more investments in these spaces, which is, right from the battery technologies to especially on the software side of the solutions as well. So that's one. Obviously, as Arjun said, the same thing, super excited about the time that is there for India, the way we are looking at some of this stuff, some of the, great visions where we kind of really innovating at front and then passing the baton to the other entrepreneurs, specifically in the SaaS space, health tech, healthcare side, diagnostic side. I think super excited about that. I think in my closing remark, I would also like to answer one of the questions that somebody had just asked on the this thing that, why is the VCs mostly or the deep tech VCs have been chasing the unicorns? Why are, what is the kind of IRR that we look at? So, I mean, if any of our portfolio get into the unicorn kind of a level, I would, definitely would believe that we would be here talking about them. So, we are not. I mean, I can speak for others as well here. I think that unicorn is something that in the enterprise tech side is not something that that easy to achieve. But even if some of the startups achieve to a good 100 million kind of a level as well, we kind of kind of satisfied with that. Obviously, India has a long way to go. We won't definitely have many unicorns to come in the enterprise tech space, enterprise product side. But I think we will take time for that. So we are not, really hungry for unicorns. Obviously, if we have, we will definitely take one. But we would be looking at many startups, which are, even if they give us 10x, 12x returns on our money, would be more than happy to have that in our portfolio. So that's my concluding remarks. All the best luck for even all our panelists, as well as to the entrepreneurs who have been listening to me and all of us. And as I said, super excited about the time that we are in.
Kailash?
Yeah. So I agree with what Arjun and Deepak said. I think not to sort of repeat what they said, but I think anything that's connected is going to see a lot of attention from investors as well as from customers. Anything that reduces physical, the need to be present physically is going to be the future. But within healthcare, because I mean, most of my time goes in sort of looking at healthcare and life sciences. I think 3 themes that we discussed internally within our team, and we had a document that we shared internally. Hopefully, we'll publish it soon as well for the rest of our friends also. I mean, 3 things that I think we are personally excited and would love to see more action in, though it hasn't been traditionally seeing a lot of entrepreneur work or hasn't been seeing a lot of investment activity, is one. I think would love to see diagnostics more than screening as an area of work. Novel diagnostic solutions, diagnostic equipment, platforms that are leveraging diagnosis, clinical grade diagnosis, assisting the physicians with decision making is something that I would love to see more action coming in. And I think they've realized the fact that, I mean, this COVID has shown us that the healthcare bandwidth that we have in the country is not as high as it should be. So technology is going to really assist frontline healthcare service providers greatly in that space. Second thing I think COVID has also done is it has made us, it has changed our relationship with food, right? Food is so basic to our existence. I think it has changed our both understanding as well as our relationship with food. What has happened is I think people have realized that food can be a great medicine in itself. So I think stuff like microbiomics, understanding how food really gets digested in your body, understanding how the microbiome culture can be leveraged to treat some diseases which were otherwise just managed, maybe reverse some of the chronic diseases, is I think is an area of work that we'll see a lot of attention and probably even funding coming in. Third, I think is also a result of the second one is our understanding of the way the immunity of the body really functions has changed also. So immunotherapy, immunology really as a platform is again something that we'll see a great deal of action coming in. And people have been working on a COVID vaccine, but really understanding how the body's immunity reacts to multiple acute or chronic conditions is something that will gain a lot of attention, both from entrepreneurs as well as investors. But like Arjun said, I think some of these are long haul plays, will require patient capital. And that's where I think will really require people to understand the space and probably have not just venture capital, but also grand sources of funding, patient capital, maybe even from strategic investors, family offices to come together and join hands with venture capital investors to really bring out something worthwhile from the country, which can be globally a success phenomenon. So I think, yeah, these are some areas that I have in mind, which will change in the coming course of months. Yeah.
That's a very comprehensive list of sectors. I hope all the attendees took note of that. Ma'am, you want to...
Yeah, I think the sectors were spelled out so well, and it'll be important to collaborate to see how all kinds of funding can be leveraged, because the VCs government should allow the VCs to leverage their grant funding well, and that relationship has to come in because some of the sectors that we mentioned, like gene therapy, immunotherapy, kind of areas, microbiome related areas, these would need very substantial funding, and I think we would need to see how collaborations happen, strategic investments happen. That's already happening, but yeah, and I completely agree with the areas that we discussed, absolutely on the spot.
Right. Okay, I think it's been a great discussion, a lot of notes. I hope the audience folks enjoyed it. Ma'am, it's in webinar mode, so it's difficult for us to get all of them into gallery view. So we will have to I have taken a snapshot with just the 5-6 of us.
Okay, no problem. So there was a question, I don't know the person whether he's left or not, whether they've applied for BIRAC, can they also apply for other funds? I would say yes. It's for you to decide where you want to apply. You cannot get government funding for something you've been funded for. You cannot double dip, but exactly for the same project. But of course you can apply to where, because you never know which one would come through. Be strategic. Yeah, so that's my advice.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It was great.
We will write to you regarding all of the funding programs, and we'll be in touch with all of you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you, ma'am, for having us. It was a lovely conversation.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.